Hello, gang. Professor McElroy here. We're in Corporate Communication and Design, January 2023. We're doing week 3, which is Learning Module 3. And Learning Module 3 is all about Adobe InDesign. Last week was a holiday, so the university was closed. And I posted kind of a 4-part series, step by step, for the car illustration kind of poster project, which is our out of book assignment for Learning Module 2. And you should know by now, this being kind of the 4th piece of basic graphic design class, that InDesign's a container program, and you'll be importing Photoshop and vector-based illustrations all into InDesign and collaging a two poster series, which is what the out of book project is for Learning Module 3. But I thought I'd spend this week talking a bit more about kind of the psychology and the process of building a corporate brand in the form of whatever media or communication that you're doing, and kind of the process I go through of using assets, developing my own assets, and kind of creating the process that I need to create my one-offs or my campaigns or whatever it is I'm creating. And Illustrator is no different from InDesign in that you can import in Photoshop files, you can import in other elements from other applications and kind of layer and collage them accordingly. Based on some of kind of the automotive illustrations I've gotten so far at this point to Learning Module 2, I'm going to spend a little time in Illustrator, just kind of talking through the process. If I was creating kind of this automotive illustration concept for my client, and I was using Illustrator as the tool to do that, spend a little time talking about my process. I'm going to import some vector art. I'm going to bring in some Photoshop files with transparency. I'm going to do some native drawing in Illustrator. I'm going to talk a little bit about the responsibility as far as typography goes, leading and kerning, and the thoughtfulness of kind of layout and solution, re-emphasizing foreground, middle ground, and background being a common kind of thread or theme that you should be thinking about as you're building your visual communication, your graphic design solutions, and any software application that you are using. It's a really big part of what we do. It's that success of connectivity between your message and the audience, and kind of the process I go through, no matter what the software application is that I'm using. It could be cut paper for that matter. I could be physically tactile in experience making something, and I go through this kind of same thought process. So I'm going to spend some time this evening really just kind of doing those rudimentary elements of process and reinforcing what we're doing to make sure that everyone kind of is pushing that full level, that full envelope of communication as we're producing our projects for our clients. Good job so far in Learning Module 1 and Learning Module 2. We're really starting to evolve our skill set and take it beyond just basic understanding of software application and kind of applying it into a final thought, a professional final thought, final composition. And that's what we're trying to do kind of at this level of coursework. You know, we're in 4 weeks of corporate communication, so we should be communicating effectively in a corporate environment, a branding environment, a product and service oriented environment. So we just want to kind of keep that in front of our mind here as we're developing. So we're going to be using Illustrator, so I'm going to open it up. And then we're going to talk a little bit about creating natively in the software application that you're using, whatever application that is that you choose, and kind of, you know, what you're thinking as you go through the process. So I'm going to create new, and I'm going to do 11 by 17. I'm just going to work in kind of a 16 by 9 format or so, like you would have been doing with your automotive illustration. And good job with those. You could do portrait or landscape in that format, quite honestly. I could have turned this thing on its side and created something that felt more like a billboard than an advertisement or a poster. But I'm going to go ahead and set it up kind of in its basic format here, just so we can talk a little bit. Let me hide my controls so I don't see those. And let's get started here. So I'm going to go in here with my layer. And remember, this is just process, and I'm just talking through the process of how I do things and how you should be thinking as you're develop kind of completed solutions, completed thoughts, right? We're no longer in brainstorming. We're no longer in kind of those infancy elements of development. We're in production mode. We're in mode for final output, right? We're creating something that that we would, be pushing out for a client for pay, for, final professional output, right? So we need to make sure that we set up our files appropriately so that that thing is a final output. And now that I think about that, I want to make this 11.125 and 17.125 because I'm going to put 1/8 of a bleed on this design because I'm going to be pushing my images to the edges. And so I don't want 11 by 17 if that's my final output. Remember, I need at least a 1/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, somewhere in that ballpark of bleed, which means image extended beyond final output because it needs to be cut, right? I've got to slice this thing down if I was going to be printing it to full color, full bleed in a process that I was going to be mounting them in Windows or whatever that tactile experience was, right? Even if I'm producing this for the web, I want to have that bleed so that I have the ability to crop this thing down to whatever 16 by 9 proportion I need for my output, whether it's a web banner or, it's a splash page or whatever it is. So just kind of keep that in mind. So now that I have that bleed set up, I set up my template layer. I'm going to go out and let's open up a new window. And I'm just going to grab an image that I can use for drawing, template drawing. So I'm going to type in canoe. It's automotive. And so I thought it would be fun. These things are very interesting to me, very appealing to me. This whole electric vehicle movement and kind of what people are producing, what they look like, boxy, rounded, that sort of thing. So I thought I'd spend a little time with the pen tool, just getting the basic process started for how I draw, when I'm drawing over images. And that doesn't matter if I'm using the paintbrush in Photoshop, whether I'm bringing a vector graphic in of a raster-based image in the Illustrator, drawing over the top of it, and then using that vector drawing for something. So just kind of keep that in mind as I'm kind of looking through here to see what it is I want to create. And so let's just I'm going to see if I can grab this image here because we're just kind of talking through my process, my creative process when I'm generating something for kind of final output. So let's just open that, see if it'll let me grab that. Yep, JPEG, so that's fine. I'm going to bring the image in and I'm going to drop it into Illustrator. I'm going to kind of scale this thing up so I have a decent sized version of this. Remember, I'm on this layer, which is my template layer. I'm just going to go in now and soften this thing up because it's going to be my watermark. And so I'm just going to soften this thing up a little bit so that I have it placed kind of in the place I want it to be placed as I kind of develop what I need to develop. So I'm going to go ahead now and lock that. I'm going to bring in a new layer and I'm going to name this we can name it drawing layer for my canoe vehicle, which is right here. And so now I kind of have something that I can build upon, something I can draw upon. I'm just going to take my pen tool. Now I'm going to do this kind of quickly so that we can talk through the process quicker as I develop kind of this final solution, this final piece. So you can see my thought process, right? So I've got my document set up. I have my bleed set up. Remember, I'm using Illustrator just like I would InDesign. I'm going to use it for a bunch of different elements. I'm going to create some native things in this program. I'm going to also import different formats, vector elements, raster-based elements. I'm going to kind of bring them in and place them and do what I have to do with them. I'm going to stack my layers. I'm going to create the process that I would no matter what software application I am for a corporate branded solution. This just happened to be an automotive illustration I wanted you to create for our out of book project for Learning Module 2, but it would be no different. And this is the same recorded process I put in our Learning Module 2 out of book at the bottom of the description. It was a series of videos just to kind of talk you through the same process, get you thinking in a way for final output. Now we have basic technical ability. Now we got to take that technical ability. We got to import applications. We got to use a lot of different tools and things, but keeping in mind the end product. In this case, it was a poster size automotive advertisement. So I would start with that. I'm going to take my pen tool real quick, and keep in mind, I'm just going to kind of do this quickly because I want to talk through the process in the lecture, and I want the lecture to not be super, super, super long. So I'm just going to go ahead real quick, and I'm going to create my drawing here, just my basic outline. And if I was doing this, I would take a little love, a little tender loving care, kind of creating my panels and my pieces here. So you're actually going to notice that I'm just going to do kind of a quick outline of the general shape of this thing. And I'm going to stop it at some of the key curves in this thing, just so that you can see kind of what I'm working on. And I'm not going to probably get the whole vehicle created, but I'm just going to talk through some of my basic processes as I'm creating final projects, final outputs for my clients. So you can see kind of my thought process. And so I'm just creating a quick outline of this, and it's not going to follow the image exactly. I'm just going to create some of the pieces I need. So there's my first kind of outline there. I'm going to go into my layers, and you're going to see this, and I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to name it main body. I'm going to lock that. And so now I can go in and start developing internal panels, internal pieces. And I want to make as many things as I can completed shapes, because I want to be able to go back in and add fills to them and add shadows and add the different things I need to add to make this thing developed to have. So this is front door. And you'll notice I'm locking each one of these pieces, which gives me the ability to create more pieces. And that outer stroke, that outer line is going to end up being my kind of outline to this thing. And then each of my door panels, right? And I'm just doing this quickly just to get you the process going, my thought process for how I create things that are going to have application, and the correct thought process for using layers, for importing elements from different places. I'm going to bump this down a little bit with my arrow key just to make sure that I have it, and I can readjust this stuff. Let's do this. And this is upper back panel. Lock that. And so now I got to do my front panel here. And I'm going to do this rather quickly. Like I said, I just want to get the basic bare bones of this thing together so we can talk about, where I'm going for what I'm getting and what my thought process is for where I need to create native, where I can find elements to import, like all the different things that go into play when you're creating something for a client, right? So I've got to bring this, kind of curve this thing. And so I'm doing this quickly. I would match this up a little bit better if I'm creating this thing as my final output, but I'm just getting the basic bones of this thing together, front panel. And so each thing, so now if I turn off my outline, you can see that those are individual panels. And then my main thing is an outline. So you can just kind of see the structure of what I have going on here. And so now I'll do my next piece. And I'm not going to get into all the nuances of all of the little interior panels that I would be drawing if I was doing this thing for a client. And that means that all of these little door pillars and everything, what you could see on the inside, I would be creating individual shapes for. But I'm just talking you through the process here so that we're kind of on the same page with structurally how I work, the elements I bring in, and my process, leveraging what I need to create natively, what I need to create raw, and what I can import in. Now, I'm not going to do a ton, but I'm going to go in and at least add kind of the pillar column here. So you can see, I'm going to add this pillar column just so I give the vehicle a little bit of definition. Left pillar, right, left pillar, like that. And then I have this right pillar here. And so I'm going to create this interior, kind of where the window would go, just so that when I import my elements, there is a, kind of a rhyme or reason to it, just so there's some fill shape there. Just so you can see. So this is window, front. So we'll lock that. And so now, let me just turn off the outline, and you can see that this thing is traced, but it also has a primary outline. So I'm just building the elements I need real quick. So the only thing I'm going to add now is bumper and wheels, so we can kind of talk about, what I'm thinking. I just need to structure this thing. And I'm going to make it just kind of, I'm not going to do all the line detail, which are the shapes inside. Like you can see this panel and everything in here. I'm not going to do all that. I'm just going to get the basic shape here. So it gives us something to talk about, something to leverage as I'm creating this thing. So let's do that. So I just want to make sure that we're talking same process here, right? We got to be talking same process. And I know the outline's a little bit different than the fill. I can go in and use my direct select arrow, and I can reshape these nodes, these points, pen points, to fit what I need it to fit, if I need it to fit that. And so I'm just getting my basic shapes in here. Now, keep in mind, like if I'm drawing this for the client, I'm doing all the details, all the door handles, everything. I'm just creating a general shape here of the vehicle, so it gives us something to talk about, to build off of. Just my basic wheel there. Front tire, like that. Yes, I could draw a circle. I could have done this just to get a general shape. Use my selection arrow, kind of squish this thing in a little bit, move that out a little bit. Give me that general shape. Then use my interior circle to get the basic wheel here. Let's do that. And then I can go in here and do a basic. So I'm going to stretch this just a little bit, just to give me like my basic distorted shear. I can stretch that out. I'm just going to drop this in. Just so you get the basic idea. And honestly, I could do the same thing, although this one in the back. So let's take these two, hold down Shift, group it, and I'm going to just call it front tire. And then I'm going to take the pen tool and just create a very basic tire shape here. About there. And so I'm just getting a basic shape here. So we have something lecture-wise to talk about as it relates to importing elements in and doing different things. And so let's just bring a circle in here now. And I'm just going to stretch it a little bit, shear it, just to get my basic shape. I could probably squish this just a skosh. So that's getting me the beginning of it. Stretch that out a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to take this. You can group it. Back tire. All right. Lock those. I'm going to hide my template so you can see I have my basic car there. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to turn the template back on. I would add another layer and I would go in and do all of the details, like this door handle. Door handle. All right, I would get in here, every little detail. And I'm going to name this now. I'm going to lock that. And I'm just going to name it details. Right, so every little line in here, every little part of this thing that creates whatever that detail is. So even all this little line work in here. And I know I covered it in the recorded video I posted, the 4-part series, but just so you get an idea. So I'm going to take, I'm just going to highlight this and group it and call it body detail. So just to get the structure the way that I want it, I'm going to turn that off, turn that, and I'm going to unlock all this stuff so that I can grab this thing. Oh, make sure all this is unlocked. And then I'm just going to do Shift Option to scale it down a little bit, just so you get a basic idea of the shape here. All right. And so now, and just for the sake of the process, I'm going to select the main body, and I'm just going to throw some color in it, just so that we have something as far as composition goes. I'm going to make it fun. I'm going to make it like some kind of light color. So there it is. Right. And then we have these, which would really be black. And these, that would be some shade of gray. And I got to add all the detail lines and all the things that I have going on here. And I'm just doing this very quickly, right? Very quickly. No transparencies. I haven't added any of the stuff I would add if I was doing a really detailed drawing. of any kind. But I'm just getting, so I'm just going to set up some basic transparency here. So like 50%. And so now I could select this, quick eyedropper, just to get the basic shapes and everything going. And this. And so now go back to my layers, lock everything but the outline. Go into my outline here. I'm just going to boost up the line weight a little bit, just to give this thing a little detail. I might boost this up a little bit. And these are just basic lines to get me started, right? Basic lines to get me started. To give me some definition. Yeah, I got to go in and do all the detail line work that I would have to do. So I'm going to lock all this and turn it all off and turn that on, just so that you can see all of this detail work. If I was drawing this as a finished product, I would do all of these little shapes in here, the lug nuts, everything, a little bit of the texture line, all the stuff that gets involved in creating this picture. But for the sake of just talking the process through, which is what I'm going to do right now, talk the process through for final output. I'm just going to leave that as my general shape, not as much detail as I would put in it if I was doing the full, full final output for my client. But you get the idea, just to get you a basic shape here. So now I would start thinking about, which was part of my concept, where's the full bleed? What elements can I import in, modify, play around with? What needs to be natively created and that sort of thing. And so I was thinking like a mountain road with some flower ivy or something going on, because this is an electric car. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to open up a new tab. And remember, we can import elements, draw some things on our own. So I'm going to go into Vecteezy and see if I can find like a mountain scene. So let's do like mountain road. See what I have here. I need portrait, or I need some crop or compilation of it to kind of develop my concept here, my idea. I kind of need the road to be towards the front like this one, because my vehicle I've kind of placed in the middle of my thing. So I'm going to start creating things natively my own. I'm going to start bringing some elements in. I'm going to start collaging everything in so you can get an idea of the process, the thought process here as I finish up my idea. So I'm going to bring this over, drop that in, and I'm going to minimize that for now because I'm not going to use any other vector graphics other than this thing. So let's bring this in Illustrator. Here's my picture. Check my layers just to see what we have going on here. I'm going to select all and group and copy. Bring this in. Now I'm going to bring in my layer. I have this template layer. Then I'm going to have mountain scene. So I'm going to lock my drawing, right? Mountain scene. Paste. Zoom out. I'm going to shift option, make sure I get my mountain scene scaled down to fit the general proportion of what I'm working in. Move this up. Zoom in. And we're just talking process here, right? I need to make sure this thing goes off the edge, right? It's a full bleed. You can see the artboard spacing there. So let's zoom that out. So that's good. I want more road than I do mountains and stuff because that's my, so I'm going to make sure that I clip this down to the proportions of my output, and you'll actually notice that I'm just off the edge, and that gives me just a little wiggle room for my bleed. Knowing this is a clipping mask and I have extra space outside of the proportions where I could get more if I needed it, right? So there's my mountain scene. I can unlock my car. And let's do a quick save, because my temporary memory is like, what are you doing here? So I'm going to do canoe, add, dump this over on the desktop. And that should help me a little bit. Let's see what we have. Let's zoom that. And I'm going to unlock all of this stuff now, except for the template. Lock the mountain scene, tuck that back in. And that'll allow me to bring my car down. So this is just the beginning of my advertisement. So, right, so my properties, I had this 50%, probably needs to be more like 75%, roughly in that 74, 75 range. So you can see some of it. Now I would do all the pillars, everything I need here with all my details, but I'm just doing placement so you can see what I'm thinking during my creative process, right? I have this concept of the canoe, electric vehicle, some kind of beautiful mountain scene. I want to introduce more greenery. So I'm going to go into, my concept is kind of vector overlay, raster overlay vector. So I'm going to go into pixels. And I'm going to do ivy, white background. See if there's any kind of ivy or anything with a basic white background. Floral, ivy. Ooh, this is cool. I'm going to download that. I'm going to import this in later. So minimize that. I'm going to bring it into Photoshop. So that's going to take a minute or so. But I'm thinking through this process. It's going to be a beautiful illustration of the canoe to really emphasize the shape of this thing. Vector to kind of bring in that illustration style, but then I'm going to bring in some raster elements to make it feel more a cross between. I don't know if you've ever seen commercials before where it's kind of like their illustration style interacting with actual video. And that's kind of the concept of the advertisement, is that I get illustration interacting with vector. So let's zoom in here a little bit. Let's see what my tolerance is. Let's go to like 20. And that way it'll let me grab some of these basic elements. I could go with my pen tool and really do a really beautiful trace of this. But for the sake of composition, I'm just talking through process with you, class, just to kind of talk through my thought process when I'm generating, creating things, what program I'm in, what I'm using the program for. And so now, let's see here. I got most of my basic shapes cut out here. I'm not going to go into great detail in here, trying to grab all these little nooks and crannies. I mean, I could go in, but just for the sake of time and process, I want to keep the lecture to under 2 hours. So let's go in here and I'm going to select inverse just to get the basic fern. I'm going to copy and paste. And I'm going to hide that so you can see I have my basic shape here. Not perfect, but good enough, really. I'm going to go ahead and unlock that. and trash it. And now I'm just going to do a file save as, and I'm just going to call it Fern Transparent, Fern Transparent to my desktop, saving my layers. And so now I have that. And so now I can do file place. And I'm going to place my Photoshop document. So here it is. I'm going to scale this down to maybe 50%. See how that looks. 50% more. So here's the beginning of my fern, copy paste. And so I'm just going to layer a bunch of ferns here. Actually, I'm going to take this, I'm going to select it, copy it. I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to call this raster. Ooh. I selected part of that car, which I do not want to do. So let's copy that, delete, lock that, add the new layer, raster, paste it, bring it in. I'm going to bring the raster layer and put it under the vehicle. I'm going to mirror it, bring it over here, keeping in mind that I'm sticking with my bleed, right? So I'm just thinking through my process here a little bit. That fern a little bit smaller. Slap that down behind here. And I like odd numbers when I'm collaging, so maybe I'll leave that fern over there. Let's move that one out of the way for a minute. Like this thing is peeking out through some kind of scene. I'm just creating different elements here. Kind of give this a little greenery, right? So now I can lock that and unlock that. So I can kind of position my vehicle. Let's just group it for a minute. So let's do, let's just do a little bit of, let's do it manually. Slight bit of perspective there. Okay, so I have my drawing layer. I'm going to add a new layer and I'm going to name this call to action. And so I'm just talking you through the process of bringing elements in from all kinds of different places, what the process is for creating native, creating new things, importing other elements, whether they're clip art, or maybe you own assets, or the ad agency or someone gives you pieces. These are all things you're thinking about as you're kind of developing your solution. I sketched this out on paper first: vector mountain scene, draw the canoe, give it silhouette, give it detail, create it in Illustrator, import in raster-based floral elements. I probably even would grab a flower too. So I'm going to get rid of that for a second. Let's get in, where's my thing? So let's see if we can do like a flower. And so I want a flower, like a standalone, beautiful flower. So let's just see. Boy, that's a beautiful flower, and it really would work with my concept. the color saturation of it. And so I'll just minimize that, bring this into Photoshop. So let's select subject. There we go. That's good. And so copy, paste, take this, trash it, flower, file, save as. I would name this flower ISO for isolation. And so I'm just taking things from different elements, different places. I might take them off the edge of the page a little bit. Right? Remember, I like odd numbers. I'm just going to pepper a few things in here in places to give this a little perspective, a little distortion, make this thing feel like very organic. So this is actually going to be flowers. Group it. I'm going to mask it just so everything feels finished. Hold down shift, right click, clip it. So here it is. I'll just take it off the page a little bit. I want to move the flowers down below the drawing so the car is still in the front. So you're starting to see vector meets raster, kind of developing my concept that I sketched out on paper kind of as I go. And now I can start thinking about call to action. Just developing my concept, developing my idea, using different sources, different file types, bringing them into where my final output was going to come out of. Remember, this was a vector-based ad solution. So I'm leveraging the vector background, the drawing of the vehicle, adding all the details, all of that, adding in transparent raster elements to develop a three-dimensional space to kind of create textures, different elements of the design. So now let's go in. I have to go to Canoe because I have to see what my call to action is going to be. Let's see what they're engineering the impossible. So I'm going to do that. That's going to be my call to action. So now let's go into our type palette. Here it is. All right, now we got to start talking about, and I'm actually going to drag it over here. We're going to start talking about like leading and kerning and what fits. And so this thing is like really rounded, this vehicle. So I'm going to see if I can't do an Avenir condensed so it's really vertical and rounded. And remember, my call to action is towards the top. So I want this thing to really, so I'm just leveraging what I'm thinking here. I want to make this really big. I want to make this like bold. I'm going to make this thing open up our paragraph palette. I'm going to center align it, move this over here. And so now I'm thinking about spatially where elements are going, right? Your eye is going to be looking at the vehicle, all this flower detail. I want my call to action to be towards the top. I want it centered on the page. I want to make sure that it doesn't read as two individual lines, that it doesn't read as two paragraphs, that it reads as one thing. I'm leveraging the layout to make it center and aligned. I'm making it all one text box to make life a little bit easier for me. I'm starting to use typography to make sure that it dominates the space, that the important words stand out, right? I'm starting to use typography. These aren't individual text boxes. This is one big text box. Okay, so now I have kind of my call to action happening here. I don't know, maybe I would like it to, be some shade of purple or something to pick up on the flowers, right? I can always do this. I can always use my eyedropper, get some deep version of what I have going on here. So let me see if I can find something that's deep. I'm going to copy this number, hex number. I'm going to go in here and select this, double click, paste my hex number, and get my type to match my color palette of my flowers, right? And so now I'm starting to kind of finalize my design here. So then I need some support copy, right? My support copy is kind of what reinforces what my call to action is. So let's see if I can find, like, I'm infatuated by some of the concepts, bringing sustainable EVs to everyone. So I'm going to use the same typography, right? Use the same typography. I think I'm gonna right align this one so I can align it with the flowers. Remember, call to actions are support copy. They're always smaller than the call to action. So I'm going to shrink this thing down. Because it is shrunk down, I'm going to go maybe with a bold or a demi-bold type. I'm going to do this, but I'm going to tighten it up just a skosh. You're actually going to see I'm going to play with the shapes here a bit. And so if we're using the purple up there, maybe I'll go with a shade of maybe a light green. Can I get this thing to stand out? There we go, like a light pink. And I'm actually going to I'm going to create a curve by using my text tool. And that way I can put this where I want to put it, kind of down here by the flower, but give it a little bit of a curve. And so this has to go this way. This has to be deleted a little bit, maybe just like that. And so now I'm using my concept. I'm dictating kind of the shape of this thing based on the elements I've placed, right? There we go. So now I'm starting, and now I'll use my negative space. You see how this mountaintop, I don't want this text right on the top of that ridge. I'm going to move it down and kind of center it a little bit using kind of these vertical and horizontal grid lines, like the bottom of this petal, kind of the negative space in between these two petals. And I'm just going to create my layout. And I'm letting it be dictated a little bit by my concept, right? So it's centered up here. Let's move that up just a skosh. And then I need my response, like what is my, so let me delete that. Let me select this, go into my layers. I'm going to copy this actually. delete, lock that, add a new layer and call this support text, edit, paste in place. So it puts it right where it's supposed to be. I'm going to lock that. And my last is going to be my URL or my web ad or address, web address, using my same canoe.com. Right. And remember traverse S. So my last thought is, where are we going to end the layout on this thing? Right. And I'm talking you through process. This doesn't have anything to do with the Out of Book Project 2. I already recorded a 4-step lecture for that. This is more just talking through corporate output. Like, where do we put things? What's the process for thinking through this thing? And so I'm going to zoom in. And this thing, I want to kind of put it at the base of the tire, kind of in the negative space of the road. So as you're doing your reverse S and you're kind of thinking through this thing, kind of going this way, that it's somewhere down here. I'm going to make it white because I need it to be kind of legible and readable, even though I'm going to make it really small. And I could do this, throw it over here, put the spacing between my letters so that we have, make it a little more legible because it's small, add a little bit of kerning between my letters. Remember, it's a bleed, so it's being cut. So I kind of gotta give it a little wiggle room. Let's drop that down there. And so now you can see what started as just a vector concept, drawing a vehicle, importing background vector elements, importing raster to develop a foreground, a middle ground, and a background, really starting to kind of develop this thing to give it kind of a mind of its own based on the final output, right? This is corporate branding. So I'm creating a vector poster that's sustainability driven electric vehicle, has earthy elements. It has some image imports just to give it a depth kind of level, but still keeping it in an kind of an organic palette, organic environment. Setting up my layers appropriately, naming them appropriately, developing all my pieces. So now if I wanted to go in and, I don't know, unlock that, let's select that. Let's add a little bit of drop shadow to those just to give us some depth. You can see it right there, but I'm going to make it like 35%. So there is 3D space there. Flowers, maybe. Apply the same drop shadow, give it some depth, lock that, which then means, I don't know, does my call to action effects stylize, maybe a slight outer glow, multiply, take our color, find some kind of light pink. Just give it a little bit so you can see it. Maybe not a ton, 0.125. I don't know, I'm just brainstorming as I'm developing my elements. Maybe my support copy to be reinforced and have it feel like the other. Add that. Really, honestly, my vehicle. I would think about maybe some kind of shadow or something to this to give it a little depth. And you can start seeing my concept, what I'm developing, but I'm finishing my thought, right? You're seeing my process. You're seeing me. I started with a concept. Oh, a green vehicle. Where did my thing go? So let's get back in here. Had a little memory collapse there, which happens, right? I was trying to save it, so it's going to hopefully restore me back to my previous recovered file. There it is. So let's just make sure we save this thing. Canoe add final. Oh man, this thing is not liking all the things I have going on. Take this, my layers. All right, so now you get the idea of the process, right? Finishing this thing to a completed thought, developing all of the elements, leveraging resources that you would leverage in a marketing environment, a corporate environment, an ad agency environment, right? The ad is for these Canoe electric vehicles, and you're responsible for creating that automotive illustration, creating that realism to the car, using the pen tool, and that sort of thing. Then you need to leverage maybe the photo catalog you have at your job, right? There's images, there's raster-based things to tie up your solution. You can leverage some vector illustrations. You don't have to develop all those pieces, but you need to develop that main piece, which is part of the project, which is that automotive illustration. And then you can leverage other elements, scale and mask them and crop them and finish with a completed thought, right? A completed idea with a call to action, support copy, a contact point of some kind, which normally means a social media hashtag, a web address, something to complete the idea, right? This is a completed portfolio piece that could become a campaign, engineering the impossible. That vehicle could be changed to the pickup truck, to the commercial vehicle. It could be a different road in a different environment. It could be urban instead of mountain, instead of having flowers, because we're kind of in this more sustainable kind of rural mountainous area. The Photoshop elements in urban world could be stop signs, could be light structures, could be cars on the side of the road, could be a skyscraper leaning into the image, still having a vector version of the city street that you place your drawing in. So you're starting to see the development of a campaign concept, all based on engineering the impossible and the 3 different types of vehicles they develop. They have a commercial, they have a van, they have a pickup truck, all based on the same concept: vector drawing, vector cityscape or background, raster-based foreground elements imported in, all with this thoughtful typography, the canoe.com being the contact point. I could have used hashtag engineering the impossible and put that down in the bottom, and that could have been my call to action. It didn't have to be canoe.com. But if I did that, I need to reference that on every developed piece. So even though your project is only developed one solution, it doesn't mean that we're not thinking through the possibility that this thing becomes more than one thing. Or you may have already been given, this is what we've already generated, engineering the impossible. We already staged the photographs. We already put these things in the environments we wanted to put them in. Now your job is to create a social media campaign in a vector environment, re-emphasizing the campaign that already was shot in photo world, staged with the car in a cityscape with a wet road and the whole 9 yards, already for an ad campaign. Now you're doing it for social media, and we want you to convert it to a vector environment. So you're thinking through kind of the elements of foreground, middle ground, background, what text elements I need, what that support copy is, what the call to action is going to be, what background elements are going to be. Are they going to be vector? Are the foreground going to be raster? All creating a concept, a corporate brand tied to a brand that already exists. So I wanted to spend this time talking you through the process I go through for developing pieces, campaign pieces, final elements to use when I'm working with a client. And they may in turn leverage these elements for a piece that they're using, a web banner, a splash page, a pop-up ad on their website that they wanted in vector world. And I draw them all in a layer environment that I could extract each layer independently. If I needed them for other pieces, I can turn elements off and import elements into InDesign, the container program, to add on to them to develop more pieces, right? Maybe I needed a transparent background, so I only bring this stuff in, right? Maybe I don't need the flowers and the ferns for a piece that I'm working on. Maybe I only need this, right? All of these elements are here. They're all separate layers. They're all appropriately developed and composed. This could have been Photoshop. I could have drawn this car, copied it, pasted it as a smart object in Photoshop, and built this piece of it in Photoshop if it was a raster-based output, if that's what the client needed. So thinking through the process, making sure that all the elements are appropriate, they're all layered, they're all composed correctly, they're all from the right source file, everything into a final file that could then be saved as a press quality PDF, exported as a PNG for the web. Thinking through the process. Don't think individually, I only need to create a car illustration. Think of it as a totality, as a whole, right? So that we produce something that we have legs with, that we can use over and over again, that we can export elements out of to use somewhere else. We don't want to have to keep recreating these things over and over again for our corporate brand. We want to be able to reuse pieces. Another reason that it's so important to think through the process and the pieces. That transparent flower I might want to use for something else once I've used it as a brandable element in this particular application. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of piecing together and developing these out of book assignments, that we're looking for a level of completion, right? And a level of thought development, a level of this is a professional output, a level of I could use this as my portfolio piece and really be proud of it, not disjointed, not half completed, that we really complete a concept using all the elements we have at our fingertips. We're in stage 4, piece 4 of our 4-piece graphic design coursework. Now we're really corporate branding, corporate completing, professional level of output. So just kind of keep that in mind, right? If you're doing a full bleed, your document shouldn't be 11 by 17. It should be at least 11.125 by 17.125. At least give that little bit of bleed. You might even go as far as 11.25 and 17.25. Give yourself a little extra room, a little extra wiggle room. I cropped all of these. I masked all these. I have more wiggle room. If I needed to, I could give this a 1/2 inch bleed or a 1/4 inch bleed if I needed to, not an 1/8 or a 16th or anything like that, right? So we're thinking through the process to a level of completion. I'm proud of this image. This would be something I could, submit to a client, produce it, make a t-shirt out of it, make signage for bus stops, make vertical billboards. Like there's things I could do with this now, but I've developed all the elements and named them correctly for future publication or future development. So just keep that in mind. This was about an hour and 15-minute lecture or so. I'm going to try to keep it at that so it's easily watchable. Learning Module 3 is a 2-poster sequence doing this exact process, just using InDesign as a container program versus Illustrator as a collage program. Same concept, same process, same thing we're doing, not a vehicle, doing more human rights, but you should be thinking through the process just like I lectured tonight. So I hope this helped you in your thought process, and please make sure you watch this recording back, and I look forward to seeing your Learning Module 3 completely developed concepts.